What's up, guys? We're back with another video in my iOS interview questions and answers series, and today we're going to be talking about the many ways you can unwrap optionals. Now I'm going to give a brief overview of what optionals are, but that's not really what the video is about. It's about the different methods of actually unwrapping the optional. Now this is a pretty basic topic, however it was asked in about 60 to 70% of my interviews, so I definitely wanted to include it in this series. Alright, let's go. To start off, let's give a quick overview about what an optional is. Again, this video isn't what are optionals, it's about how to unwrap them, but just a quick overview. So let me just define one real quick. So let's do var, say optional number, and it'll type int question mark. So optionals allow you to write flexible and more safe code. So this variable called optional number of type int can either be, say 24, or it can be nil. And that's kind of the way I look at this question mark that helps me out. It's kind of like, is this nil or is this, a number, 12, 24, or whatever it is? And it can be either one. So like I said, it allows you to write flexible, more safe code. And in general, what I mean by that is because we're allowing this variable to be nil, our program won't crash if it gets a nil because we're letting the compiler know, like, hey, this can be nil if necessary. So let's get into it and you'll understand what that means more in a little bit. So in order to get to an optional's value, you have to unwrap it. Picture an optional like a box, and inside that box is either a nil or an actual number value, in our case, an int. So one of the most common ways you'll see is the if-let syntax, which let me give you an example here. I'm going to go ahead and fast forward some typing. Okay, so let me walk you through what's going on here. So here on line 10, this is the if-let syntax. This is what you start off with. And this variable called number right here is kind of like a temporary variable that we're saying, hey, if optional number, which again is what we set up here on line 5, if optional number has a value, go ahead and execute what's on line 11. If optional number is nil, go ahead and do what's on line 13. So as you can see down here in my console, down below, I do not have a value, I am nil. That's because up here on line 5, we haven't set optional number to anything. So when it goes through the if-let syntax, it's going to say if-let number equals optional number, but optional number is nil, so it's going to go into the else statement. If optional number had a value, it would execute line 11. So just to illustrate that, let's give the optional number a value. So optional number equals 23. So now in the console you see I have a value, it is 23. That's because when it ran the if-let statement, optional number had a value because we set it to 23. So now number equals 23, so it executes line 12. And again, if optional number would have been nil, it would have went into line 14 into the else statement. So that's a basic example of how you safely unwrap an optional. Okay, back to our code. Let's talk about guard statements. Guard statements are used with function because the big thing about guard statements is they provide an early exit out of the function should something be nil. Let me go ahead and write out this function and it'll make more sense. Okay, let's talk about what's going on here. So here on line 20 to 28, I just created a function. This function is just tripling our number. So it takes in a number, which is an optional int, and it's going to be our optional number up here, line 23, but we're going to do it as a nil and as a value. So again, the big part of this guard-let function is it provides an early exit out of the function. So basically, if this number that we pass in is nil, we're going to find that out right away in this guard-let statement, and then we're just going to return. We're not going to execute any more code in the function. That's what I mean by an early exit. So basically, it's like this task, this function of triple number, we don't even want to execute at all if we get a nil. We just return out of the function, we're done. However, if it's not nil, then we're going to go ahead and execute some code. And that's a typical example of guard-let. So just like if-let, you type guard-let. And again, this first number is the temporary variable. And then we're going to set that equal to number, which is what we passed into the function here on line 20. So if what we passed in here on line 20, again, this is right here, is not equal to nil, then we're going to go ahead and continue executing the code. If it is equal to nil, then we're going to go into our block here. I'm going to print exiting function just so you can kind of see what's going on here. And then we're going to return and get out. So now I'm going to call this function so you guys can see it in action. And it takes in a number, and we're going to pass in our optional number variable that we have there. Okay, so in this first example, because up here on line 6, we set our optional number to something. Remember, I've been going back and forth between commenting this out or not to show the example. So right now, optional number has a value of 23. So when this function gets called, the number being passed in is 23. So it has a value. So when we say guard-let number equals number, it's going to equal 23. So because it's not nil, we're not going to go into this guard-let statement. We're going to go ahead and execute the rest of the code. And the rest of the code is print my triple number, and then it's just number times 3. And then you see down here, my triple number is 69, and that was unintentional for those with dirty minds. Now let's see what it looks like when it's nil. So let's go ahead and comment out line 6 up here, comment it out. So this way optional number is now a nil. And then you can see in the console, it printed exiting function. Because what happened here is when we called triple number, the number we passed in was nil because it was an optional. There's no value. So what happens in the guard let statement is guard let number equals number. Well, it's not going to equal number because number is nil. So it goes into the else statement. In the else statement, we print exiting function, just so I can show you guys that it did go in here. And then we return, and we're out of the triple number function. No more code is being executed beyond this return statement. So line 27 never gets executed. So that's the main point of the guard statement. If you're running a function where you don't want to execute anything else if the value you're passing in is nil, guard is perfect for that, because if it's nil, it's going to stop the function, exit out, and you're done. Or if it actually has a value, it's going to go ahead and execute all the code. All right, let's move on to force unwrapping. And this is a big one, because Xcode a lot of times will give you the automatic fix it button when it has an error, and it's going to tell you to force unwrap stuff. The big thing about force unwrapping, think of it as an absolute last resort. That's just a general rule of thumb. You only want to force unwrap something if you are absolutely 1000% sure that value is going to be there. Because if for some reason that value is not there, it's going to crash your app 100% of the time. So again, a good rule of thumb, if you ever find yourself force unwrapping something with an exclamation point, think twice about that and say, okay, should I be doing this? Obviously, every situation is different. Maybe it's perfectly fine to do it for that situation, but it's a great practice to stop, think twice, and be like, okay, should I be doing this? So, okay, with that said, let me show you force unwrapping. So let forced number equal optional number, and then we're going to go ahead and force unwrap it. And now you see I'm getting an error, and that's because up here on line 6, we have our value commented out. So right now, optional number is just an optional, it's nil. So when you do this, on line 34, let force number equal optional number. And again, what the exclamation point does, it says, I don't care what you think, just unwrap it, give me whatever value it is. And if that value happens to be nil, your app's going to crash. So you see, I'm sure many of us have seen this error plenty of times in Xcode, fatal error, unexpectedly found nil while unwrapping an optional value. And if you're force unwrapping everything throughout your code, you're probably going to see this error a lot. And that's why I go back to, if you find yourself using this exclamation point a lot, think twice about it and make sure that it's really okay to do it. And like I said, 95% of the time, it's probably not okay to do it, but there are certain circumstances where it is. But let's talk about optional chaining now. Okay, before I type out my optional chaining stuff, I'm going to go ahead and comment out line 34, the force unwrap example, so I don't keep getting the error in my playground. I'm going to fast forward some typing a bit. Okay, let's talk about what I'm doing here. I have my typical, iOS device struct that I like to use a lot in my examples. And then I've just created a device called my iPhone, but I haven't initialized it with anything yet, right? You notice like my iPhone currently doesn't have a type, price, or color. I haven't done that yet. And that is so I can show off optional chaining. So let me demonstrate what optional chaining looks like, and I'm sure you guys have seen this throughout your code. So let's do let device price equal my phone dot price. And like I said, this is very similar to force unwrapping with the exclamation point. However, the major key difference is this allows it to fail gracefully. And what I mean by that is when you use optional chaining, this variable device price is automatically going to be an optional, meaning this can be nil or a value. And this is kind of where the failing gracefully comes into play. And like I said, this is very similar to force unwrapping where you use the exclamation point, meaning that this my phone object, which is a device that's optional, is being automatically unwrapped so you can get to the price property. So just to clarify, you're only going to use optional chaining on an object that has properties. For example, my device object has a property of price. And why it's similar to force unwrapping is because it is automatically just going to unwrap the phone no matter what and get the price. But where it fails gracefully is because when you use optional chaining, this variable called device price is automatically going to be an optional itself. So itself can be nil or it can have a value. So therefore your app's not going to crash when trying to get access to your phone's price property if your phone happens to be nil, which in my case it is right now. So now let's try to use our device price. Let's just say we're going to add a tax to our device price. So let total equals device price plus $8.99 for tax. And now look what Xcode does. Xcode gave us an error. Normally you'd have the red little fix it button. Not sure why Playground isn't playing nicely, but if you scroll up, you can see here over to the right, value of optional type float not unwrapped. Did you mean to use an exclamation point or a question mark for the optional? So what Xcode's fix it would normally do is tell you to put a force unwrap there. And then if you do that, you're going to crash. You're going to get the unexpectedly found nil while unwrapping an optional. And again, that's because when you use optional chaining, this device price is automatically an optional itself. So how do we get to the optional? So the right way to use device prices, like I said, is to now safely unwrap the optional, just like we learned with the if let statement. So if let device price equal device price, Now we can go ahead and print my total price equals device price plus 8.99. And you see it's not printing anything down in the console. That is because currently my phone is nil. So let's go ahead and give it a value real quick. Go ahead and fast forward the typing. Okay, great. Now you see it printed out. My total price is $707.99. That is because we used optional chaining to get my phone.price. My phone now has a value, which is right here. So now it has a price property. So now device price is an optional set to $699. We need to unwrap that optional that we got. So if let device price equal device price, it does have a value. It's $699 because my phone has a price right there. So because it does have a value, it's going to go ahead and print my total price equals device price plus $899, which is down here $707.99. So I think I got a little long-winded there, but hopefully that explanation helped. Optional chaining allows you to fail gracefully when you're trying to access a property of an object when that object can be nil. And the reason it fails gracefully, like I said on line 48, is because the result of this optional chaining right here, this device price, is going to be an optional itself. And then as you saw here on line 50 to 52, I had to unwrap that optional. Okay, scroll up for a quick recap. The if-let statement is the basic way to unwrap an optional. The guard statement is used in functions, and the big thing about the guard statement is that it lets you return out of the function quickly. Then we have force unwrapping. Go ahead and uncomment that so I can get my error. Force unwrapping, you never want to do. I shouldn't say never. You very seldomly want to do. And again, if you find yourself using an exclamation point, just take a step back, think twice. Should I be using this? It's very dangerous. And optional chaining, like I just said, it allows you to fail gracefully into a new variable that isn't optional itself. So that's it. That's the handful of ways that you can unwrap optionals. So now go crush this question on your interview. All right, if you found this at all useful, go and hit subscribe. I put out new videos all the time.